So when it comes to the subject of loving your neighbor as yourself, the Samaritan wasn't an outsider. The reason why the story of the Good Samaritan in context of loving your neighbor as yourself is so offensive is because the Samaritans were a mix between Israelite and pagan backgrounds, Israelite and Gentile. And so, if you want to contextualize what the Jews felt about the Samaritans in the context of the Harry Potter universe,
Filthy little mudblood.
so when you look in places like John 4, where Jesus is interacting with the Samaritan woman, which, side note, the first person to know that Jesus is the Messiah is a Samaritan woman who represents the Jew and the Gentile, we see that both the Samaritans and the Jews are worshiping the same God. But even though they worship the same God, even though the Samaritans and the Jews shared a common ethnic heritage, the Samaritan was looked down upon and seen as unclean, excluded from fellowship because they were not pure Jew. So what Jesus is setting up in the story of the Good Samaritan is that the lesser brother is better at caring for the least of these, of loving his neighbor, than the Israelite is with their own people. It's also important to note that this parable is coming out of a discussion with a religious leader, a teacher of the law that wants to justify themselves, where he says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus asks him, "What's written in the law? How do you read it?" And he says, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, and with all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And so ultimately, what a parable like the story of the Good Samaritan is getting at, is what a lot of Jesus's ministry is getting at, is that you claim to serve God, but you're not loving your brother. You're not loving your neighbor. John puts this a little bit more succinctly in 1 John 4 when he says, "If anyone says, 'I love God,' and yet hates or is indifferent towards his brother and sister, he is a liar. For the person who does not love his brother or sister whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen." And this points to what I was talking about in the previous video, that the primary focus of what Jesus is talking about is your brother and sister. It is the community of the people of God. And this is what you see all throughout the New Testament church, right? The giving up of the possessions to be redistributed to those who have need, the caring for the orphan and the widow, the feeding of the hungry, that's happening within the context of the church. That's why we can have passages in the New Testament that say things like, "In fact, when we were with you, this is what we commanded you. If anyone isn't willing to work, he should not eat."